Good afternoon, Paul. It's Monday, the 21st of November. Here's the heads up brief for today.
Hi, Uday. Hope you had a good weekend and a well-deserved day off on Friday. Go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. So, Paul, the political uncertainty in Malaysia following the November 19th elections and the hung parliament is not much clearer as of right now. It's still really messy. An alliance that was forming last night has already broken as of earlier today. There's a lot of influential players who are all trying to pull power towards themselves. The election also seems to have ushered in some winds of change, if only in terms of taking power away from the more traditional power brokers. It seems that Mahathir's political career could finally be over. He lost his seat for the first time in 50 years.
Yeah, well, that's incredible, and it's interesting to see how it is emerging and who will form. It's clearly going to be a coalition government, which means a few people have an ability to make a hell of a lot of money by holding power. So there's no very little discussion going on in Malaysia behind closed doors about aligned policies or thinking about the best for marginalised and the poorer communities. This will be all about the cash for the blokes in the centre. Go ahead, mate.
Right, Paul. In Thailand, cannabis supporters and advocates will gather at the government house in Bangkok tomorrow from 5 p.m. It's to support a bill by the Boom Jatai party, which has pushed for the legalization of cannabis.
Yeah, look, I think that's going to be a really low-key affair, but tomorrow just make sure the early teams keep an eye on that. That location can be a little bit awkward if it is anything other than what I'm expecting, a few Thai hippies to rock and roll there, but just keep an eye on that early.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. Paul, in Timor-Leste, the weekly protests against the government in Dili are seemingly increasing in size. Students from two more universities are joining, and this comes ahead of the parliamentary elections next year, where the scrutiny on parliament will escalate.
Now, they were saying that, I mean, those demonstrations were called for every Monday to Wednesday. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
So just really important that the team looks at that. We engage with our guy there, obviously, regularly, like beam him. Obviously, he's got a lot on his plate, but we need to beam him just to make sure he's on top of
yep,
the issue there.
yep.
Okay. All right. Thank
All
you.
right, Paul, moving over to South Asia. In Nepal, one person was killed while dozens of people were injured in election-related violence. The elections were held yesterday. Because of the violence and low voter turnout in some constituencies, voting in some districts was postponed, so the elections have pretty much been delayed with the results.
Okay, thanks.
In India, there was a small explosion that happened on the outskirts of Mangalore in Karnataka on November 19th, and Indian authorities are now claiming that this is a terrorist attack. The suspect was apparently affiliated with the Islamic State.
Okay, interesting. That's a twist. Thank you.
Yeah. Paul, also in India, sugarcane farmers across Maharashtra have threatened to hold statewide protests and on November the 25th. And when they do this, they normally block major highways across the state, disrupting travel between cities like Mumbai and Pune. And yeah,
Okay, look, that's interesting. Let's make sure we get all these emerging dates into our um, impacts
yes,
calendar.
yes.
And I think this week I'd like you to probably let's have a chat with Raga, but let's pull the pin on the COVID updates
Okay, sure.
and let's replace that with an upcoming impacts. Okay, any major impacts from COVID can just slip into the upcoming impacts calendar. Okay, and then we'll distribute that.
Sure, Paul.
Maybe weekly or a couple of times a week. All right, we'll discuss that in a separate meeting.
Yeah, we can do that tomorrow in our management hall.
Yep, thanks.
All right. Lastly, for South Asia, Paul, Imran Khan's long march is on the outskirts of Islamabad in Pakistan. They're sitting low. There's been a lot of talk and huff and puff, but in terms of actual movement, that's slowed down, it seems.
Yeah, roughly how big are they? Are they disruptive? I mean, when I was a kid, mate, I used to enjoy watching Imran Khan as an all-rounder, steaming in neat from the Paddington end at great speed, but it doesn't appear these marches match that. Is it really just hot wind now, or has it still got the ability to turn nasty and narky?
Paul, due to the tensions, it could definitely turn nasty, but you're right, it's not as disruptive as, we've seen some of the nationwide protests in Pakistan in the last 2 to 3 years, which have completely disrupted travel. There's been a lot of violence and all. This has been quite muted as compared to all of those.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, lastly, in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, energy cuts in Ukraine are increasing due to winter demand and an escalation of Russian attacks targeting energy infrastructure since their withdrawal from Kherson city. According to some estimates, nearly 50% of the country's energy infrastructure is offline.
Yeah, look, I think when we saw Russia pull out and leave Kherson City alone, I mean, it was only the naive that heralded that as a great victory for Ukraine. There was clearly more to that than meets the eye, and let's have a look at history. It's a very powerful example in history where Germany basically went a hell of a long way to losing a world war by not understanding the logistical perils of winter. Guaranteed Russia hasn't forgotten that lesson. Perhaps Zelensky may be better to less huff and puff and more thinking, because of great concern about what role ultimately energy and warmth, some pretty basic necessities there, are going to play in the outcome. And the old adage that you don't win wars without infantry on the ground applies, and sending gift packets, which is weapons and munitions, it doesn't replace the need to fight on the ground. And unfortunately, the West is part of its soapbox politics and soapbox power games, thinks you win wars by sending gifts and by talking a lot and imposing sanctions. But I think Putin may have the proverbial middle digit out at some of the stuff that the West thinks is going to win the war for the Ukraine.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, Paul. So thanks a lot for that. That's the heads up brief for today. Any last closing comments?
No, mate, thank you. Great brief.
All right, thanks, Paul.